Madam President. Madam President, I am here today to talk about a public health epidemic that every year kills more people in the United States than gun violence or motor vehicle accidents. Last year, drug overdoses killed nearly 50,000 Americans. Almost 60% of those overdoses were caused by prescription opioids or heroin. Drug overdoses are increasing the death rate of young adults in the United States to levels not experienced since the AIDS epidemic more than 20 years ago. These skyrocketing death rates make them the first generation since the time of the Vietnam War to experience higher death rates in early adulthood than the generation that preceded it. So we ask ourselves, what specifically is causing this tidal wave of addiction and overdoses? Well, the answer is clear. Over the last 10 years, the Drug Enforcement Agency has increased by 150% the amount of oxycodone it has approved for manufacture. For 2016, the DEA has told Big Pharma to make nearly 1.4 million grams of oxy. That's enough for almost 15 billion 10-milligram pills. Let me say that again. That's enough for almost 15 billion 10-milligram pills to be sold in America this year. That's a full bottle of potent painkillers for every man, woman, and child in the United States of America for 2016. This tsunami of opioid addiction is swallowing families as quickly as Big Pharma wants Americans to swallow its pills. Yet today, despite this raging epidemic, you would think that the Food and Drug Administration, the agency responsible for the safety of all prescription drugs in the United States, would welcome every bit of expert advice it can get from doctors and other public health professionals. In fact, the FDA's own rules call for it to establish an independent advisory committee of experts to assist the agency when it considers a question that is controversial or of great public interest, like whether to allow a new addictive prescription painkiller to be marketed in the United States. Instead, the FDA has put up a sign in its window, "No help wanted." The FDA began turning its back on advisory committees in 2013, when an expert panel established to review the powerful new opioid painkiller, Zohydro, voted 11-2 against recommending its approval. But the agency, the FDA, approved the drug anyway, overruling the concerns voiced by physicians on the panel. Those experts criticized the agency by ignoring this incredible growing epidemic. The advisory panel warned that this OxyContin epidemic, this heavily abused prescription painkiller that the FDA first approved back in 1995, needed a new test for safety. They warned about the growing dangers of addiction, of abuse, and dependence associated with the entire class of opioid painkillers. Justifiably, the FDA was lambasted for its decision to approve Zohydro by public health experts, doctors, governors, and members of Congress. But despite the warning of the real-world dangers of abuse and dependence on these new supercharged opioid painkillers, the FDA willfully blinded itself to warning signs. In 2014, in the wake of the Zohydro decision, the FDA twice skipped the advisory committee process altogether when it approved the new prescription opioids, Targinic and Hysingla. Then, in August 2015, the FDA did it again, this time by bypassing an advisory committee on the question of new use for OxyContin for children ages 11 to 16. This time, the FDA even ignored its own rules that specifically call for an advisory committee when a question of pediatric dosing is involved. In other words, there's a special category when children are involved that call for advisory committees. The FDA ignored that. At this point, it became that the FDA was intentionally choosing to forego an advisory committee in order to avoid another overwhelming vote recommending against approval of a prescription opioid. Why? Because the FDA would then have had to ignore yet another group of experts in order to continue its relentless march to put more drugs into the marketplace. With the OxyContin for Kids decision, the FDA's reckless attitude towards expert advice on drug safety went too far. Children whose brains are not yet fully developed are especially vulnerable to drug dependency and abuse. Yet the agency focused its so-called safety analysis only on concerns about proper dosing, saying that it needed to only tell doctors the proper doses for children who needed the drug. Well, that's just plain wrong. We use experts to determine if child car seats are safe, if toothpaste is safe, if vaccines are safe. We should use experts to determine if these opioid painkillers are safe for our families. We need to immediately reform the Food and Drug Administration's opioid approval process if we want to stop this epidemic of prescription drug and heroin addiction. Last week, I placed a hold on the nomination of Dr. Robert Califf to head the FDA. Before I can support this nomination, the FDA must make 3 needed changes to its opioid approval process. First, the FDA needs to make sure that every opioid approval question is reviewed by an external panel of experts. Second, the FDA needs to consider addiction, use, and dependence as part of its determination of whether an opioid is safe. The FDA cannot continue to operate as if safety just means dosage when it should include all of the dangers as well of these painkillers. And third, the FDA should rescind its decision on OxyContin for Kids and then convene an advisory panel as it should have done in the first place. Then the FDA can reconsider the OxyContin for Kids decision with the benefit of that panel's independent advice and with the proper meaning of safety in mind. The FDA must commit to shift the way it approaches and evaluates addiction before I can consider supporting Dr. Califf's nomination. The prescription drug and heroin epidemic knows no geographic boundaries, and our response should know no political boundaries. That's why Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and I worked together to identify solutions to this crisis. Last spring, Senator McConnell and I joined together in calling for a Surgeon General's report on the opioid crisis. And last fall, Surgeon General Vivek Murthy announced that he will be issuing a new report on the substance abuse crisis this year. There was, 50 years ago, an historic report on smoking that changed the way our country viewed that. This is the same kind of report which we need for the country to see from our Surgeon General. But that's just the first step in a larger, comprehensive national strategy that I am fighting for this year. We need to stop the overprescription of pain medication that is leading to heroin addiction and fuel. That starts with the prescribers. We need to ensure that all prescribers of opioid pain pills are educated about the dangers of addiction and appropriate and responsible prescribing practices. I have a bill that requires every prescriber of opioid pain medication in this country, as a condition of receiving their DEA prescribing license, to be trained in the best practices for using pain medications and methods to identify and manage an opioid use. Stopping overprescription also includes narrowing the pipeline at the front end.
Senator's time has expired.
I ask unanimous consent to just continue for 2 additional minutes.
Is there objection? Without objection.
Thank you. This means that the DEA needs to reduce the quotas of oxy and hydrocodone that it approves for manufacture each year. The DEA is allowing Big Pharma to manufacture too many of these pain pills. Although the United States is less than 5% of the world's population, Americans consume 80% of the global supply of opioid painkillers and 99% of the global supply of hydrocodone, the active ingredient in Vicodin. Tragically, we have become the United States of oxy. With the opioid epidemic reaching epic proportions, our federal budget should reflect the magnitude and importance of investing in treatment and recovery services. In Massachusetts, approximately 65,000 people are currently dependent on opioids. 50,000 need treatment but are not receiving it. Treatment for prescription drug and heroin addiction is absolutely at the top of the list of the things that this Congress should deal with. And so that's why we need to work together. We need to make sure treatment is there for each of these patients, and that includes ensuring that patients can receive from a physician the help that they may need from Suboxone. Right now, that is denied to many different patients. I've been in Congress for 39 years. I've never actually seen an issue like this that rose so quickly that affects so many families in our country. A day does not go by in the state of Massachusetts where someone doesn't come up to me and talk to me about a family member who has been affected by this epidemic. It is time for us to join together in a bipartisan fashion to produce the kind of legislation that can give hope to families that relief is on the way, that prevention and treatment will be there to help their families deal with this crisis. I hope that we can accomplish that goal this year. I do believe that we can do it on a bipartisan basis. Mr. President, I yield back the balance of my time with the thanks to the Senator from Alaska for her indulgence.